Okay, there are some problems in the world. Citation not needed on that. Some of these problems are what I would call political problems, where to solve them you need to get a whole host of people together and get them to ally or agree and pass some sort of legislation, and that's how you solve them. Others are what I would call manufacturing problems, and there to solve them you just need to build a lot of stuff. And we tend to be a lot better at manufacturing problems, and as technology advances, a lot of problems that used to be political problems sometimes transform themselves into manufacturing problems. Example, hunger. This used to be the most important political problem. When the harvests fail, who gets to eat and who doesn't? Whole civilizations have fallen over that issue. And now, at least in the rich West, hunger is a very minor problem, because we've solved it by making it into a manufacturing problem. We just produce so much food. In contrast, obesity is a difficult problem in the West that we can't solve by just building a lot of stuff. In fact, it's rather the opposite. Here are some other problems that people think exist in the world today but actually don't. Overall, and be careful of that word overall lack of food, water, and energy. I crunched the numbers some years back and found that if we were to only eat hydroponically grown food, only use distilled seawater for our water, and get all our energy from solar panels, we could do it at roughly the same cost that our agriculture and energy industries have today. And since I did those numbers, most of those costs have gone down. Now, remember I said overall, there are huge distribution issues. Who actually gets the food, who gets the water? But for humanity as a whole, we are not running out of these things. We manufacture the solution. And for many of scarce resources, it's the same case, not for all, but for many of them we have substitutes, we can build them, we've kind of solved this. Here's another problem that I hope will become a solved manufacturing problem: global warming. How do I see this being solved? Well, just simply through the continually declining costs of alternate energy and especially of batteries to go with them. As the cost of these go down, so though the problems with global warming get worse every year, the cost of solving it permanently also go down every year. And I make a rather confident prediction that when it gets to the point that we could solve global warming for trivial costs, then all the current political objections and all the denialism and things like that, they'll just sort of mysteriously vanish and fall by the wayside. Now, this is just some of the trends that lead to transformation into manufacturing problems. We have general technological improvements, we have surveillance, mass surveillance, and the modern idea of surveillance, which is surveillance of powerful people by essentially everyone else. I think you can probably think of an example or two recently in that area. Also big data, overhyped, but still effective, and the plethora of narrow automation, narrow AI developments that we're having. What this means is that intractable problems in, say, crime fighting, healthcare, and other similar issues may be transformed or transforming into manufacturing problems that can then be solved. This is something to keep an eye out. The political inevitable realities of yesterday may not stay that for much longer. But let's look at the ultimate idea of manufacturing some ideal future. What would be the ultimate tool if we could manufacture it en masse? Well, intelligence. This is the old idea of artificial intelligence from the 80s, from the 60s. Have a machine with the skills and capabilities of a human, the general intelligence of a human. Could we do this? And if we could do it, well, how would that transform our world? First of all, I'm going to start doing a little bit of prediction here. And it's notorious that predictions in AI, especially for timelines, are remarkably poor. Here are two of my favorite predictions in AI. So in the first one, in the Dartmouth conference, in 1956, where they sort of started the whole AI. You got the most brilliant theoretical and practical people in the world, the best at making computers do what they wanted to. And they sat down and put all their brilliant minds together, their practical minds, and said, yeah, maybe over the summer we'll have AI. Then 9 years later, Dreyfus, in an otherwise excellent paper, was kind of going, yeah, well, maybe automation, it's done as much as it can do. So neither of these predictions have come true. Here's a bunch of other predictions, most of which have not come true, and which contradict each other. These are dates given by people as to when we might have AI. From Turing's original prediction that we'd have it by the year 2000, to a whole plethora. Now you might notice that they're sort of scattered all over the place, with no strong pattern whatsoever, with 10, 20, or even 100 years between them. There's a little bit of a pattern. We found that people preferred to predict that AI would happen 15 to 25 years after they made the prediction. Apart from that, it's scattered all over the place, and most of the predictions, which I've actually read, are not very good. It's more sort of, my gut tells me blah, rather than we have some sophisticated model and thorough analysis. Now, two warnings here. The first warning is, just because experts are terrible, don't conclude that your idea is any good. You are as good as an expert at predicting AI, i.e. you're terrible. The second thing is that errors can happen in both directions. This might mean we might have AI for a long time. It might mean we might get AI unexpectedly soon. But what can we say about AI if timeline predictions are so bad? Well, there's a bunch of analogies and arguments. They're not ideal, but they're kind of the best we have in this field. This is the first analogy. Let's see what intelligence has already done. That's a chimp brain. Chimps' brains are very similar to human brains, a little bit smaller. But chimps have a population of about 200,000 and use basic wooden tools. Humans, well, we're a little bit better than that. We've spread over almost the entirety of the planet with a population of billions. For a large mammal, this is incredible. We have heavy industry, we've had nuclear weapons, and since we've used computers to extend our intelligence, we've done a bunch of other things like landing on the moon, developing hydrogen weapons, and having unprecedented economic growth. So the point of this analogy is, if you imagine a fourth category beyond there, what capabilities could it deploy? What would it be capable of? Well, at least causes you to pause and think for a second. Here's a more precise analogy. What if we had human-level intelligence? We have a box, it is a computer, it can do human-level intelligence. Well, what could we do with that? For a start, we could copy it multiple times, and we could train the copies at very high speed. Oh, is the microphone getting out? Yes, it is. We could train the copies at very high speeds and run them, pick the best ones, and train them in very different areas, and then network them together. And we could form a super committee consisting of the AI equivalents of Edison, Einstein, J.K. Rowling, Angela Merkel, Oprah, Confucius, Goebbels, Bernie Madoff, and Steve Jobs. All of these people, cognitively brilliant in their area of expertise, be it good or evil. We take their AI equivalents, we network them together, give them lots and amounts of data, and run this super committee at thousands and thousands of times human speed so that they have a week to think before giving any one of their answers. And remember, this super committee can also be copied multiple times until we have millions of them, or billions, if we feel like it. So for an entity like this, I feel that the internet or the human race might just be useful tools for whatever their goals are. And their goals, now that's an interesting question. That's the key question. Suppose we take an AI and we want to give it a goal like filtering spam. This seems something moral and good for it to do. But if it's a very powerful AI, it might just say, okay, shut down the internet. No more spam. Thanks, that was an easy task you gave me. Obviously, we don't want it to do that. So we don't just want it to filter spam, we want to filter spam and follow all of human morality while it does that. The more powerful the AI becomes, the more important it is to have all of human morality as a safety thing inside it. So it's for reasons like this that Stuart Russell, one of the fathers of modern AI, once said, you don't see engineers saying that they want to build bridges that don't fall down. Instead, they just say they want to build bridges. The not falling down is assumed. Similarly, nowadays we have to say we want to build provably beneficial AI, but one day soon this will just be called building AI. A final illustration of what the challenge could be. Suppose we want to have an AI to keep humans safe and happy. Okay, that's a worthy goal, seems a bit better than filter spam. But the problem is that every single one of these words comes with many asterisks as we try and pin down what they might mean. Like, let's take happiness. Do we measure it by brain chemicals? Do we measure it by smiling? Do we measure it by self-report? And if we measure it by self-report, well, we don't want the AI to point a gun at us and say, tell me that you're being happy. That's not what we mean. So we need to define coercion and manipulation. And pretty soon we realize we have to define a whole host of complicated terms just to explain what we mean by happy. And what about and? What's so complicated about and? Well, what's the trade-off between safe and happy? And what's the trade-off between safe and happy in some of the extreme situations that an AI could create? And what about all the other things like flourishing, freedom, rights, equality, the stuff that we haven't mentioned there, but we also value, and we don't want to just trample through that. And finally, what about humans? Again, we wouldn't want the AI to produce sort of fake pseudo-humans, put their happiness at maximum and say, yay, great success. So do we need to define a special Turing test to identify us so that we know what it's working on? Anyway, this is just an illustration. this is my day job, working on ways of getting these goals safely into AI. We don't use this kind of direct approach anymore, but there are some interesting challenges still remaining. But I'm hoping we might be able to solve it. And if we do solve it, well, what else could we solve? I've talked about manufacturing intelligence. If we can do that on a grand scale, what can we solve? Well, here are a bunch of things we can solve. First thing, absolute poverty. So number of people living in really dire straits. We're already actually making quite a lot of progress on this. In the last 10 years, the progress has been rather extraordinary. But with an AI, with these smart AIs, we could really solve it practically overnight. Because the absolute poverty, the problem is people don't have enough stuff. To simplify a little bit. People don't have shelter, people don't have sanitation, people don't have access to safe water, all those things. They don't have enough of this stuff. And building this kind of stuff is things that AIs would be really great at, and deploying it and getting it to the people who need it, they would also be good at that. Relative poverty, i.e. difference between rich and poor, that's a completely different challenge. But absolute poverty is something we really could probably solve with AI. What else? Well, crime, especially the sort of crime where someone punches someone else and anyone who looks at that can tell it's a crime. This is probably going to go away with AI-enabled surveillance. We're already going in that direction, and AI will just push us even further. If we're cunning, we might even be able to program the AIs to ensure privacy at the same time as this is happening, but that's another level of challenge. But in any case, that sort of crime is probably on the way out. So what about war, which is basically crime between states? There's a variety of reasons why AI may make this impossible as well, surveillance being one of them. If you know exactly what your enemy intends, what secrets they have, and they know what ones you have, then first of all, you can't really amass a secret army to go to war at any point. And if you start preparing for war, this becomes clear the moment you even start thinking about it. And there's a variety of other arguments. They're a little weaker than the arguments against crime, but that AIs would lock peace in place. Finally, things like health. Now, there's a variety of people in this audience that I can see who have a major health instrument on them. I can see it very clearly, and those who have it are looking at me through them. Yes, eyeglasses. What eyeglasses illustrate is that when we can solve a problem, a medical problem technologically, we generally solve it much earlier and much more cheaply than if we want to do it biologically. So poor eyesight has been solved to some approximation of solved for hundreds of years because we could build these glasses. Now, maybe with laser eye surgery, we get to the point we might be able to solve it the other way. And with AI developing tools like this, we might be able to solve a whole host of medical problems through various implants in the body. And even for the traditional biological innovations, automated research is the sort of things that AIs could do. And not just physical health, but mental health. We all have our mobile phones, but what if we all had a cognitive behavioral therapist on the mobile phone? One that never slept, never tired, never charged us hundreds of pounds by the hour, and was carefully attuned to us specifically, well networked with billions or billions of cognitive behavioral therapists across the world who were carefully updating each other on how to deal with humans. And it's not just solving the bad stuff. What about the good stuff? What about relieving boredom, keeping us entertained, educated, interested? All those sort of things are challenges that AIs would become brilliant at as soon as they start to understand us well, which I hope/fear that they will be. And finally, I like to throw this one out here because it's a bit controversial. How about death? Now, death is very fun because it has so many spiritual and philosophical connotations in our culture. But also death, in a way, is just the extreme version of ill health. If we're kept free of disease, healthy, then what precisely would we ever die of? You don't just die of old age, you die because something hits you as your body weakens. And if your body is prevented from weakening, what would you ever die of? Anyway, as I say, it's just an interesting idea that I like putting out there of the more extreme problems that AIs might be able to solve. So this is what the solutions we might be able to solve through manufacturing. As for the other problems that will remain, well, I think we can let the future generations sort those out. Thanks for listening, Ben.